My name is Miriam Delaney, and thank you for asking me to speak. I'm speaking on behalf of a group of architects and designers that I worked with this year called Free Market, and we worked to exhibit an exhibition at the Venice Architecture Biennale. And I'm going to speak a little bit about the project itself, what we studied, and then what we see as maybe the long-term potential of the project and the impact of the project. Just to introduce the Venice Architecture Biennale, in case people aren't aware of it, it's a biannual architecture event in Venice with an audience of, this year, about 280,000 people, and it's the largest global forum for architectural exhibition and debate. And every Biennale, a curator is chosen who sets a theme, and this year was the first time that two Irish women were chosen as the curators. Shelley McNamara and Yvonne Farrell were chosen as the overall curators, and they set a theme which they called Free Space, which they asked each country to then respond to, or each exhibitor had to then respond to this theme. So their theme of free space, and this is just a very short quote from it, describes a sense of humanity at the core of architecture's agenda, focusing on the quality of the space itself and the ability of architecture to provide free spatial gifts to those who use it, and its ability to address the unspoken wishes of strangers. So they set up a curatorial manifesto, and then a group of 6 of us got together when we read that statement last summer. And for us, when we heard this kind of free space theme, resonated very much with our interests in Irish towns. So we are 6 architects. There's Lawrence Lord and Jeff Bullhouse, who run a practice called AP+E, myself, Tara and Joanne, who run a practice called Culturestruction, and then Orla Murphy, who teaches in UCD and also runs custom architecture. So we came together as this kind of loose collaboration of people who had, through research and practice and teaching, had different interests in Irish towns, in participatory design process, in the study of the Irish town morphology, in current planning issues to do with towns. So we made a pitch to Culture Ireland and the Arts Council that we would like to represent Ireland, and we were very shocked when we won and a bit daunted by the prospect of a very short time frame, about 6 months, to plan this exhibition and to bring it to Venice. But when we presented to the panel that it was an open call to who selected the national participant, we showed images like this of Castleblaney in County Monaghan and of Rush in County Clare, and images from the Lawrence collection which shows what the market squares in Irish towns used to be like, or the marketplace. And we talked about the centre of the Irish town being this public realm, and how in the present condition a lot of these places have been stripped of their function of exchange and congregation. So we said that in a town like Templemore in Tipperary, there is still a very intact architectural heritage, and still largely the urban form is still largely defined by the original buildings, but on the ground this is what a lot of these places now look like, which is surface car parking, with little opportunity to use those spaces for anything but surface car parking. And we pointed to other examples where the quality of architecture in the town is let down by the quality of the urban realm. So we said about Mountmellick in County Laois, Macroom in County Cork, and some of these towns still do have a market function in their market square, like Macroom and Cork, but often it's competing with car parking, and it's almost peripheral to what's seen as the primary function, which is getting traffic through towns and on street and market square parking. Kilrush in County Clare was another one that we pointed to with a similar, I mean, looking at the aerial photography, it's very striking that the market hall and the town centre is effectively a roundabout. So once we were selected to represent Ireland, we chose 10 towns. We chose 10 small towns, so each of these has a population of 5,000 or less, and we chose them across like kind of a broad geographic range, but also from different urban morphologies. So some were medieval wall towns, some are plantation towns or are estate towns, so they have different forms and different histories. And also because of the wide geographic spread, they're also facing very different challenges. Some are commuter towns, some are dealing with very high levels of vacancy or dealing with potential problems coming down the road with Brexit. So we were looking at these towns in terms of their history, but also the challenges that they face going into the future. So having identified 10 towns, we then visited the towns and started to photograph them and map them and document them, which meant focusing on the kind of big picture stuff of the town plan and looking at the options open to the town, but also looking at the material cultures of the Irish town. We were conscious that in Venice we present this work to a global audience, the vast majority of whom will never visit an Irish town. So part of what we wanted to show was what is an Irish town like? What does it feel like? What makes it unique? What's the difference between an Irish town and maybe a small town in another country? So things that we recognise as very much the kind of Irish condition of the small town, the tiles, the lettering, the font, looking at this classic kind of terrazzo threshold where you step in off the street or off the square in through a doorway into a shop. Again, signage and colours, but also looking at the reality in a lot of these towns of vacancy, of shops and houses being boarded up, but in some of the towns where there's vacancy levels up to almost 50%. And so quite a contemporary portrait of the Irish towns rather than it being overly sentimental or historically focused. We looked also at what is the life in the town, so that the town is not just the physical or architectural infrastructure, it is what is the daily life of the town, the parades, the going downtown at lunchtime, the meeting up at the pub at the weekend, so that we documented through photography but also through sound pieces, the kind of life of an Irish town. So these are photographs that we then published in a series of books about the life of the Irish town. In terms of the exhibition itself, we were given a space within the Arsenale, and we're at the very end of a long walk, about a 400-metre walk through a very, very long enfilade series of rooms. So when we planned the exhibition, we wanted somehow there was a characteristic, somehow it was sort of resonant of what an Irish town is like or the market square is like. So we created this widening in plan where people come in through that opening on the bottom and come into this space here where the exhibition area opens up, and we created these kind of abstracted shop fronts which have the mosaic tiles, the formica countertops, and we have the content then placed around that. We benefited from the fact that all of the exhibitions, well, most of the exhibitions before ours were dark and were artificially lit, whereas ours was daylight and had quite a different experience walking into it. So within that framework that we set up, we used large-scale photography, models, drawings as our content. We wanted, because we're conscious in Venice that some people walk through very quickly, a huge amount of content, so that the quick visitor, the person who walks through and just spends 5 minutes in the exhibition, gets some sense of the character of the Irish town, maybe if they don't stop to read the text or to read the book, but that there is some quite quick sense of what it is like. So we took this photograph of a shop in Abbeyfeale, Veronica Broderick shopfront, which became for us quite important touchstone in terms of what we wanted the exhibition to feel like. So we used similar tiles, we used that lettering to work with graphic designers to develop a font, which we call Broderick. And then that became kind of the key image that we used throughout the design of the exhibition, the Veronica Broderick shopfront. So we developed mosaic tile patterns, which again are based on the photographs that we've taken of these threshold spaces into shop fronts. At the launch of the pavilion in May this year, or May last year now, 2018, it was fantastic because that widening that we created, which we thought was an abstraction of the Irish marketplace, was full of people. We had 300 people there. Shelley McNamara, Vaughan Farrell spoke very passionately about architecture and about the Irish town, and it was just a great sense of occasion to be there at that launch and to be talking about small towns, because typically Ireland's entry to the Venice Biennale may be the work of a practice or about a project, so to be talking more generally about the condition of the small rural town is unusual. We produced a newspaper which I will distribute at the end of the talk today, which we call Free Market News, and it was a way of us maybe presenting more content and more research than we could show on the wall. So the exhibition is limited in its scope to present a lot of text or a lot of data, so instead we use this newspaper, but also using the newspaper in recognition that the kind of local or the regional newspaper is still a very important part of the Irish small town. We produced these books which were part of the exhibition, which we call the Town Taxonomy books, which categorise those photographs that we've taken in the 10 towns into things like edges and doorways, colour and type, vacancy and potential. So we made these books which are part of the exhibition, and we were also working then on some research which within our group of 6, some of us have been involved in for a longer time, and worked on this drawing which is a morphology map of Irish market towns. So we started off with close to 200 and we ended with 100 Irish market towns where we drew their town plans and looked from the first OS maps in the 19th century at what that morphology was of the Irish market town. So that's a sort of an ongoing piece of research which is embedded within the Venice Biennale project. We were conscious when we were doing this that we are by no means the only people thinking about Irish towns or talking about Irish towns or researching them, so we made that quite explicit in the exhibition. We put together a bookshelf with 30-40 books which are about key people who we see as having driven this agenda in Ireland, people like Patrick and Maura Shaftry, and we included their works. We included works internationally of other people thinking about small towns and urbanism across Europe and America, and also asked some of those people to contribute to our newspaper. And we also talked about the Irish town in literature. So we used this exhibition as a way to highlight that the small Irish town, when we think of writers like Kevin Barry and Donal Ryan, a lot of contemporary Irish literature is based in the small town. So that was also made clear in this bookshelf. We had 3 sound pieces which we can sit and listen to in the exhibition. One was a reading by Kevin Barry, who commissioned the journalist Owen Butler to write a piece for us about living in a small Irish town. And then we also had an interview with Patrick Shaftry, where he talked about the work that Patrick and Maura Shaftry did in the 1970s about the survival of an Irish town. We commissioned drone photography, which we thought was a really clear way of giving a sense of what these spaces are like, what the towns are like. And photography from Paul Tierney, looking at the shops and the life and the character of the life around the towns. We also, and I'll move through this very quickly because I know I'm on a very short time frame, we made proposals in some of the towns that we had chosen to identify that there is a lot of potential in these towns to tackle some of the issues that we had identified. So in Mountmellick we looked at the potential of the long backland garden sites to increase living and work in the town centre, and the potential to resurface that market square and to redesign the traffic through the town, really give that a much more cohesive character. So again, I'm moving through these quite quickly, but there were these drawing proposals. At Ballinrobe, we focused on the fact that Ballinrobe has such a startlingly high vacancy level, and we were analysing that in terms of vacancy level, but also the fact that it is a dispersed market town. There are a number of market places and squares, and how those could be connected through pedestrian routes through the town. So at the moment they're all surface car parking, but how that might be challenged. In Castleblaney, we focused on the fact that there was a market hall in the centre of this diamond, the market diamond, and that has been derelict for a long time, but the condition is not unusual because in some of the other towns there are also market halls that are either underused or derelict due to the, redundant I suppose is a better word, due to the closure of the urban town councils. So in Castleblaney we made a proposal for the reuse of that market hall, and also claiming back some of that public realm around it, which is now all road. So within the exhibition in Venice then we exhibited it as models and as drawings. This is a model that we made of Templemore, of the market square in Templemore, which is very striking in terms of its form and its length. And we talked about a kind of small incremental change there to claim back some of that surface as a shared public use, not getting rid of all car parking. It has way too much car parking for the size of the town, but about claiming back a small amount around the market hall that could then have flexible use. And that was very kind of positive reaction to exhibiting these models and drawings in Venice, where people were interested in these places and asked us about, you know, Templemore and where were these towns that nobody had heard of before, and suddenly there was an interest in them. While doing those, and I mean again the time scale was limited, but while doing those short projects, what kind of struck us was a lot of the things we were proposing, like the Templemore project, were pretty small scale and achievable. You know, we were not talking about kind of radical architecture or covering the square in umbrellas, or, you know, the kind of straightforward common sense approaches. And we became more and more aware, which we were already conscious of why these things were not happening. So why these kind of pretty achievable projects were not happening. So a bigger piece of work became documenting all of the government agencies, the funding streams, and the policy sources that are involved in Irish towns. So once we started to do that, we say, okay, well, there's a huge amount of policy being written from national level, you know, Ireland 2040, to local development plans. At every stage there is policy and documents and frameworks. Within agencies there is a huge number of government agencies across government departments, but also semi-state bodies. There are also voluntary organisations. Then within funding streams it's also extremely fragmented, like how do towns get funding? The lack of oversight or cohesion across these different funding streams we see has been a really big problem to implementing long-term change. So this map that we drew to try and illustrate the confusion that exists around policy, government agencies and funding became, I think, probably the most important outcome for this project going forward. The Heritage Council, again, when they offer advice on how your town can get funding, and they've put up great information on their website, but it does point to the fact that there are so many groups involved and so many people to talk to, and particularly at a local level when you have local community groups interested in doing something in their town. The way into this funding streams, the way to figure all this out is extremely onerous. And unless you have a very dynamic, active community group, sometimes this doesn't happen. And people don't know how to access these resources or funds, or who to talk to, or who to get advice from. So when the project was up and running in Venice, we were quite keen that we would talk about it at all kind of levels, that we would be in the Nina Guardian or the Clare Champion, as well as being in the Financial Times, so that we would get the message out there at quite a high level, at a level of policy and at a level of decision making, but also listening carefully to what we had already heard and what we were being told on the ground by community groups. So we took part in conferences in the Netherlands, we were on Slovakian TV, and we were talking to architects who came to visit the pavilion about their experience of small towns in other countries, but also describing that particular condition of the Irish town internationally. So there's another one of the same gloomy group shot as we've managed to produce everywhere. We're all looking very serious. And then we were lucky in July, because it was the first year that there were Irish curators to the overall Biennale, and that the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar came to visit the exhibition and spent quite a bit of time in the exhibition and was interested in the content, because it is a subject, I suppose, that's very pertinent at the moment with the development of long-term policy. So in 2019, this year, we're taking down the exhibition. The exhibition was designed to be modular and demountable. The exhibition is going to be taken down and brought back to Ireland. Well, it has already been brought back and it's in storage at the moment, and then this summer it's going on a national tour. And when we presented our initial pitch at the very start of this project, we said at the outset that it was critical to go back to the towns, that if we only spoke about it in the Venice Architecture Biennale, it's a huge kind of missed opportunity. So the pavilion will tour back to the Irish towns, and we hope, this is our kind of ambition for it, that it will have an outdoor presence, that it will be part of festivals and markets that happen in the town. So we're linking with 4 local authorities to plan for this exhibition in their market square of their town, which will be in, I have the names of them up here, Kilmallock, County Limerick, Castleblaney, County Monaghan, Mountmellick, County Laois, and Macroom, County Cork. So in each of these towns then we're holding associated events, so town hall meetings, talks, interviews, working with schools and local community groups about the future of your town. We are also hoping, and this is something that we're working on at the moment, towards a national conference, which may be autumn 2019 or maybe early 2020, but looking at a multidisciplinary conference about the future of the small town. And to that end, to the ambition of this national conference, we've had a meeting recently with Michael Ring, and we've had a meeting with the Department of Housing. We're talking to people like the Heritage Council, and have had very strong contacts with the Heritage Council throughout the project, but about having some type of a conference or a symposium which gathers together people from different disciplines and backgrounds into this discussion about the future of the small town. So we see our ongoing role, or our ongoing I suppose ambition, that we would continue to advocate for small towns at governmental level, and we're in quite a unique position to do that because of the exposure of this exhibition in Venice, with an agenda about consolidating funding streams, more place-based funding, as at the moment, as you know, it often sits in very dispersed pots, forum for local voices in decision making. So we have been contacted by some of the towns that we studied, asking for our input or advice on how they have their feelings known, who do they contact. You know, there's this feeling, particularly often in voluntary groups within small towns, about what to do next. How do we can see what's happening around us, how do we challenge this? Higher emphasis on design from the outset, with an ambition to have a town architect for every town, that we incentivise living in towns, and that there would be a greater awareness of best international practice. So that's, I think, my time up pretty much, is it, Ian? It might be coming to a town near you this summer, and if not, and we will continue hopefully to tour and talk to other towns, because the 4 towns that we are travelling to are, the towns that are selected often have similar issues to lots of other towns, but we'll also continue to be available to talk at other local events and to other local authorities and show you maybe some more of the research that we've done, or continue to get other feedback and input into it. Okay, thank you.